For 16 years, one man in Europe held a veto that kept Ukraine starved of the money it needed to survive. On the night of April 13th, 2026, that veto died. It died in a Budapest ballroom under the blue and yellow lights of Péter Magyar's Tisza party as a 77% voter turnout wiped Viktor Orban off the political map of the European Union. And the moment Orban conceded a 90 billion euro door swung open 60 billion for weapons, 30 billion for Ukraine's bleeding state budget, with Moscow realizing far too late that its last friend in Brussels had just been voted out of a job. But the real story is not the money. The real story is what Kyiv now intends to do with it. Because while the Kremlin was busy blaming American peace talks and whispering about frozen front lines, a retired 3-star American general named Ben Hodges was quietly laying out the blueprint for how this war actually ends. Not a frontal assault. Not a meat grinder breakthrough through minefields. Strangulation, a slow, cold, precision strangulation of the peninsula that Putin has built his entire legacy around. And tonight on this channel, we are going to show you exactly how that plan is already unfolding, why Russia cannot stop it, and why the fall of Crimea will not just end this war, it will rewrite the rules of the entire 21st century. Let us start with the numbers, because the numbers are what changed everything. Péter Magyar's Tisza party won its 2/3 supermajority on April 12, 2026. It did something no Hungarian opposition movement has pulled off since the fall of communism. According to reporting from Reuters and the Atlantic Council's own dispatch from Budapest that weekend, Tisza captured the largest share of votes any Hungarian party has ever received in a free election, with a turnout of 77%, the highest since 1990. Orban conceded on election night, and within hours, every major European capital knew the same thing the Hungarian veto on the European Union's 90 billion euro Ukraine support package was dead, gone, erased. Analyst Daniel Fried, writing for the Atlantic Council, called it a correction with continental consequences. 60 billion euros of that package is earmarked for military procurement, artillery shells, air defense interceptors, long-range missiles, and crucially cash for European defense industries to ramp production on the very systems Ukraine needs most. The other 30 billion is budget support, keeping Ukrainian salaries, paid pensions, flowing hospitals open. For Kyiv, in a year when the Trump administration in Washington has rotated its attention toward the Middle East, this is a lifeline. More than a lifeline, it is oxygen. And Ukraine is already spending that oxygen in ways Moscow never saw coming. Because if you have been watching the Southern Front closely, really watching it, not reading the propaganda coming out of Russian mill blogger channels, you already know that something shifted in February of 2026. Something the Institute for the Study of War started flagging in its daily assessments. For the first time since 2024, Ukraine regained more territory in a single month than it lost. 400 square kilometers on the Oleksandrivsk axis, according to Major General Oleksandr Komarenko of Ukraine's General Staff, speaking to RBC Ukraine on March 10th. Villages east of Huliai-Pole like Andriivka and Ostapivske and Pishchane were cleared. Ukrainian paratroopers rolled into Berezov in the Dnipropetrovsk region, and this time there were no PowerPoint lies. ISW confirmed it on the ground with geolocated footage. Stay with me here because what happens next is the hinge. Everything that has been stalled for the past 2 years, every scenario the Pentagon called impossible, every plan the Washington think tank crowd buried is about to land on Vladimir Putin's desk all at once. Retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the former commanding general of United States Army Europe, has been saying the same thing in public for 3 years. Crimea, he argues, is the decisive terrain of this war. Not the Donbass. Not Kharkiv. Crimea, and the way to take it back is not to punch through Russian trenches village by village. The way to take it back is to make holding it impossible, to make every Russian soldier on that peninsula wake up every morning and ask himself why he is still alive, why his ammunition is not arriving, why his airbase is on fire, why the harbor where his fleet was supposed to shelter is now a graveyard of floating steel. Hodges calls it isolating Crimea. In his 2023 CEPA essay, and in every interview he has given since he laid out a 3-front strangulation, and every single piece of it is now live. Front 1 is the sea. Drive the Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol. Hodges has been blunt about this for years. If you put long-range precision weapons inside Sevastopol harbor, those Russian ships cannot just sit there. The facilities burn, the dry docks burn, the fuel burns, and Russia has already learned this the hard way. By late 2024, 2024, according to the Crimea platform's reporting on Hodges' own analysis, a significant portion of the Black Sea Fleet had already withdrawn from Sevastopol, redeploying to Novorossiysk, a far less capable base and further away from everything Moscow wants to hit. Ukrainian naval drones, the SBU's Sea Baby platforms developed entirely in-house, have turned the Black Sea into hunting ground. Combined with British-French Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles and Ukraine's own Neptune anti-ship missile now repurposed for land attack, the Russian fleet is running out of places to hide. And think about what that actually means for the war. The Black Sea Fleet is not just a fleet, it is the launch platform for the Kaliber cruise missiles that Russia has used to terrorize Ukrainian cities, Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, for 4 straight years. Every corvette pushed out of Sevastopol is a launch platform pushed further from its targets, burning more fuel, needing more maintenance, spending less time at sea. The Ukrainian SBU confirmed that Operation Spiderweb in June 2025 knocked out more than a third of Russia's entire Black Sea cruise missile launch capability in a single night. One night, and the fleet has never recovered to pre-strike levels. The Moskva, Russia's former flagship, already sitting on the bottom of the Black Sea since April 2022, was the first sign of what was coming. What Hodges saw before anyone else was that the Moskva was not an accident, it was a pattern. Front 2 is the Kerch Bridge, Putin's $3.7 billion vanity project, the umbilical cord between mainland Russia and occupied Crimea. Hodges' doctrine is brutally simple. Here you do not need to drop the bridge into the sea, you just need to keep it broken. And on June 3rd, 2025, Ukraine's security service did exactly that. At 4:44 in the morning, an underwater blast, 1,100 kilograms of explosives, roughly 2,420 pounds, delivered by a Marichka uncrewed underwater vehicle, detonated beneath the rail bridge's midspan abutments. According to Kiev Post's battle damage assessment, this came the night after Operation Spiderweb, which the SBU said disabled 34% of Russia's Black Sea cruise missile carriers in a single coordinated strike. Repairs to the Kerch Bridge inspections alone, Kyiv Post noted, would stretch into months. And every day that bridge falters, Crimea's occupiers grow more isolated. The Marichka itself deserves a closer look because it is a window into something bigger. Developed by the Ammo Ukraine Volunteer Network, this underwater drone was built to be resistant to Russian electronic warfare, navigate the Kerch Strait undetected, and deliver surgical precision against reinforced concrete targets. That is an indigenous Ukrainian weapon system, solving an indigenous Ukrainian problem on an indigenous Ukrainian timeline. No Washington approval needed, no German hesitation required, no Atakem's release authority argument. And that is the pattern you are going to see repeating across 2026. Ukraine has stopped waiting, Ukraine is building, and Ukraine is hitting. Front 3 is the land corridor, and this is where the 90 billion euros really starts to bite. Now let us pause for 1 second. If you are getting value out of this breakdown, if you want to see how the next phase of this war actually plays out, and not the version the Kremlin is selling, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. We track this stuff every single day on this channel, and we do not flinch from where the evidence actually leads. Okay, back to it. The land corridor is the strip of occupied territory that runs from Russia's border through southern Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia down to the Isthmus of Perekop and into Crimea itself. This is the artery Russia uses to truck ammunition, fuel, food, and rotation troops into the peninsula. Hodges has been clear for years, and General Christopher Cavoli, the current commander of United States forces in Europe, has echoed the theme precision beats mass if you give it enough time. The American HIMARS platform firing guided multiple launch rocket system munitions reaches out about 90 kilometers. The MGM-140 Army Tactical Missile System, ATACMS, reaches 300 kilometers. Storm Shadow reaches over 250. From the Ukrainian-held side of the front, every rail junction, every fuel depot, every command post inside that corridor is now inside somebody's kill envelope. And the Russian military machine has a catastrophic vulnerability here that almost nobody in mainstream Western media talks about. Russian combined arms doctrine is still at its core Soviet. Russian massed infantry depends on Russian massed artillery. Russian massed artillery depends on headquarters, on ammunition stockpiles, on railheads, on trucks. Hodges wrote this himself in his CEPA essay. All 3 of those links headquarters ammo transport can and should be targeted with long-range precision. Cut the head, cut the supply, and the tank in the field becomes a very expensive rusting box. No fuel, no shells, no command hand signal. Just steel sitting in a sunflower field waiting for a drone to find it. Think about what happened at the Crimea factory in Bryansk in early 2026. A storm shadow barrage, reportedly multiple missiles, struck one of Russia's largest military microelectronics producers, according to the Ukrainian General Staff. 6 people were killed, but the real damage was not human. The real damage was to the supply of the guidance chips, the drone circuit boards, the precision munition seekers that Russia was trying to manufacture domestically after Western sanctions cut off its chip imports. You cannot build a Lancet drone without chips. You cannot guide a Kaliber missile without chips. Every facility like Crimea that goes up in flames tightens the noose on Russian combat capability 6 months downstream. That is not a headline. That is a slow motion kill. Now layer in the specifics of what Hodges wants done inside Crimea itself. The Saki Air Base on the west coast, the same base where 10 Russian aircraft were destroyed in August 2022 in the strike Ukrainian General Valery Zaluzhnyi later confirmed was his should in Hodges' words be made completely unusable. The Jankoy logistics hub in the north, which he has publicly described as needing to become, and this is his phrase, a huge bonfire. The Belbek military airfield near Sevastopol, where Russian air defense systems have been lighting up Ukrainian drones for more than a year. The S-400 surface-to-air systems that Moscow parked on the peninsula to project an air denial bubble over the northern Black Sea. Every single one of those nodes is now a priority target. And with 90 billion euros flowing from Brussels, the ammunition to hit them is no longer rationed. This is the piece the Kremlin cannot spin. Russia can draft more men. Russia can send more waves. But Russia cannot manufacture more ports. It cannot teleport a new Black Sea fleet. It cannot rebuild the Kerch Bridge in a week. And it cannot relocate Sevastopol to somewhere else on the map. What signs suggest we could see in the coming months? And this is where the open source analysts at ISWCEPA and the Royal United Services Institute are starting to converge, is a tempo increase on all 3 fronts simultaneously. More naval drone swarms, more Storm Shadow and Scalp fired from F-16S, which Ukraine has now been flying operationally for more than a year. More deep strikes on Russian oil depots, air bases, and microelectronics factories. Remember that Storm Shadow barrage on the Crimea factory in Bryansk in February 2026. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, that plant was one of Russia's largest military microelectronics producers. That is not a random target. That is a node. That is the kind of strike that rots a Russian brigade from the inside out. Because the drones stop working, the communications degrade, the guided munitions miss. And it gets worse for Moscow. According to Ukraine's HUR director Ole Ivashchenko and President Volodymyr Zelensky in a joint briefing earlier this year, Ukrainian intelligence obtained a classified internal Kremlin assessment estimating that roughly 1,315,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the start of the full-scale invasion, 1.31 million. Zelensky said the figure was understated. Even if we take the lower Kremlin internal number, the human input stream that Russia has been feeding into this war for 4 years is running on fumes. Putin has bought himself men with prison pardons, with North Korean conscripts, with signing bonuses larger than a doctor's annual salary. He cannot keep doing it forever. Which brings us to what losing Crimea actually means. It is not a map change. It is not a line moved on a news graphic. The fall of Crimea, if and when it comes, is a civilizational message. It tells Beijing watching this war with clinical interest from its own offices in the Zhongnanhai that territory seized by force in the 21st century can in fact be taken back by force. It tells every mid-sized power with a border grievance that the old rules of the 1990s still apply, that aggression costs, that occupation can be undone, that international law is not just a museum exhibit. Taiwan analysts are watching this very closely. So are Moldovan, Armenian, and Georgian strategists. For Xi Jinping specifically, the math around Taiwan changes the moment Crimea changes hands, because Crimea is the template. Russia annexed a peninsula, weathered sanctions, held it for more than a decade, and convinced half the world to treat the occupation as a fait accompli. If that script can be reversed by a smaller, poorer, outgunned democracy with drones, cruise missiles, and European money, then Beijing's own assumptions about an amphibious Taiwan scenario quietly start to unravel. Strangulation doctrine works at sea. Strangulation doctrine works against bridges. Strangulation doctrine works against logistics hubs. Every single one of those vulnerabilities exists on a Taiwan invasion timetable too. That is why Pentagon planners have been quietly asking CEPA and RAND for Hodges-style playbooks for the Western Pacific. Signs suggest a Crimea reversal would reshape every wargame on the Defense Department's classified shelves overnight. Inside Russia, the shock would be nuclear in a political sense, not a physical one. Crimea is Putin's founding myth. It is the annexation he built his domestic legitimacy on in 2014, the moment he told his own oligarchs and generals that he was a historic figure, a gatherer of Russian lands. Losing it would detonate that myth on live state television. It would hand every exiled Russian liberal, every disgruntled general, every sanctioned oligarch a reason to start asking out loud whether this man is still fit to rule. And for the oligarch class, specifically the ones whose yachts, London properties, and Swiss bank accounts have been under Western sanctions since 2022, a Crimea defeat would finally make the cost-benefit argument obvious. Loyalty to Putin bought them isolation-frozen assets and ruined business empires. For what a peninsula they can no longer travel to, protected by a fleet that no longer exists, connected to Russia by a bridge that no longer functions. CAGED himself has predicted for years that the loss of Crimea would drain the will to fight among Russian troops across the entire theater, because in his words, and the Donbass was never what this war was about for the Kremlin. It was always the land bridge to the peninsula. Take the peninsula and the bridge has nothing to connect to. This is not a fantasy scenario. This is the strategy that has been in plain sight in every Hodges interview, every CEPA policy paper, every ISW operational assessment for 3 years. What changed on April 13th, 2026 in Budapest is that the fuel tank got filled. 90 billion euros, a supermajority in Hungary, a counteroffensive already retaking villages in Dnipropetrovsk, a Black Sea fleet that has already vacated its home port, a bridge that has already been cracked open underwater, and a Russian military that for the first time in this war is losing ground faster than it is taking it. Putin is not going to announce this. His state media will not cover it, but the math no longer works for him, and Ben Hodges, the man who first laid out this strangulation doctrine when half the Pentagon said it was crazy, is about to be proven right in front of the entire world. If you want to stay on top of this as it breaks, hit subscribe on this channel and turn on notifications. The next 6 months are going to be decisive, and we will be here breaking down every strike, every intercept, every number, every map change as it happens. Stay sharp. We will see you on the next one.